We told that we're going up to Mexico. All right. It is the next one. He was all good, man. We didn't have to move this stuff. We got good.
And I should have gone back and checked with I forget about that.
Yeah, that's true.
Not that I ever do that, but
You talk about others. It's like Laura just teaches class one time. Maybe there were 4 or 5 people. Jared, that's your encouragement. Sally had her eyes open.
Yeah, not that I would know.
That girl here.
I'm actually still do that.
There was. Is this boy also? Barbara class did. He's always getting in trouble. We came in one day, wrote down. Jared, you want to read the Bible? No, that's all right. You want to don't want to read. She said, "Would you want to read the Bible?" He goes, "Yes." He was like, so he opens up the Bible. Be good or mom will thank you.
Oh, that's good.
I wonder what happened.
That is hilarious. Oh, that's good.
It was. We got in trouble.
Yeah. And there were several others. Oh, yeah.
Tyler should always have
Well, I can sing. That's why it's like my collection, you know.
all right, let's take good thought. You get lots of carbohydrates. I guess I didn't brush my teeth well enough this time. Okay, you're allowed. You write your book back. That's my lane freezer out It's actually past time to get started, so, that's all. They're being industrial, last year meeting of the year, they had to get it all. That's right. Hey, Seth, you want to say a prayer for us? All right, you do. There you go, say prayer, and everybody quiet. All right, go ahead.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're so very thankful for this day that you've blessed us with to come here and gather Christians of like faith to study a part of your word and to take something from here and apply it to our lives. We're so very thankful for all the blessings that you provide for us. We know that everything we have comes from you, and we're so very thankful that you continue to watch over us and look out for us. Please help us to be focused throughout this class and throughout the sermon upcoming. We ask that we would worship you in a way that is pleasing. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, sir. All right. We are going to continue our construction project, Building a Better Christian. Appreciate Lee's thoughts last week. And I don't know if we didn't really talk about this. I can't remember. I don't know if all the different topics that we're going to go through, I don't know if you looked at that, but just the intro, all the different things that we're going to be building on. So faith, trust, hope, love, desire, patience, building walls, building enthusiasm, building confidence, building relationships, building bridges, and building joy. And so kind of a mixed bag of different things there, but I think also a lot of these that just kind of build on one another, and I think that's certainly true about today. One of the things that I think we're going to have to be really careful about in each of these is just defining what we mean by, we're building faith and then building trust. A lot of times those are very connected words. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but just kind of defining exactly what we're talking about to try to be a little bit more precise about that. But anyway, I just want to make sure that we kind of mention that. Again, if you haven't looked at those things, that's kind of what's ahead for the class. Our objectives for the class is talking about each of those different things. So if you have a comment that would fit better in a different character trait, save it for that one and try not to cross over. I think that's really reasonable. Thank you. Say whatever you think whenever you think about it, because if you're like me, it won't come back. All right, this idea, we talked about this a little bit last week, and I just want to kind of revisit that a little bit again, is this idea of a better Christian. If you think about that phrase, there's a little bit of a paradox within that phrase, right? be a better Christian? Is there such a thing as a better Christian? Well, if you're a Christian, right? I mean, there's one sense in which I'm a Christian, I'm saved, I'm a follower of God, and are we going to get into the practice of grading all the Christians on a scale? I just want you to think about that again a little bit. Is there utility in trying to be a better Christian? And I think, one of the obvious answers is just that we want to make sure that we are becoming better as we go along, and I think that's a very justifiable thing. And I'm not saying that this is a useless study. I'm just throwing this out there as a thought question. What does it mean to be a better Christian? Should we be a better Christian? What are our thoughts about that? So I'll just throw that out to you real quickly. Any thoughts about that real quick? We'll take a couple of minutes to think about this. And I kind of want to keep coming back to this because that's the reason we're studying these things. And I want to make sure that we are kind of grounded in that and that we have the right purpose in thinking about our study. So what are your thoughts about that? Again, I know we talked about this a little bit last time, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. We had some really good thoughts about it, but I think it's important for us to keep that in mind before we dive into the specific topics again.
Luke, there's usually a lot of areas where we can grow, especially when you dispel the misnomer that you have to have your life completely put together before you become a Christian.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that they become a Christian and they truly are a Christian, but their life has a lot that needs to be fixed.
Yep.
And so that's really true for most of us. We can become a Christian, we are saved, but when we look at our life, there's a lot of progress that we need to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. We are saved as a Christian, right? And that's the Christian part of that is that we're not talking about being more saved. That's not really a thing, right? So in one sense, you can fall into the trap of, well, I'm saved, right? So, okay, all right, we check that box, right? I'm good, but I think, Jake, your point is correct, is that there's a lot of stuff that we can continue to clean up. Maybe the follow-up question to that is why? Why clean that up? Why keep progressing? I've been saved, right? So I'm good, right? Okay.
I just think it's a neat question because there's a lot of paradoxes and phrases that we use sometimes. But when I look at this one, to his point, whether you were just baptized yesterday or you've been a Christian for 80 years, you know better than the other one in one sense of the word.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also played baseball, and so does Shohei Ohtani, right? He makes $700 million to do it.
Over 10 years.
I got my tuition paid for it, right? And so there's different levels of the skills involved in being.
That's not $10 million a year.
No. So there's different levels in the skills involved in being a Christian or being a baseball player. And so, you might be very good at teaching while somebody else can open a Bible and read it, but that's not a skill set they have developed, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. That reminds me of the parable that Jesus tells about the workers. He goes out and hires at the beginning of the day, and he pays them a day's wage. And he goes out and finds some in the middle of the day, and some like the last hour. I think there's 3 in that parable. And they all get paid the same, and it's like, wait a second, And I think that's a little bit of a Jew-Gentile application of that parable as well. But it serves the same point, is that I've been a Christian for 50 years, and I've done all these great things, and this guy becomes a Christian after living a debauched life in his 70th year of life. We're still going to the same place, and that is a great thing, and that's a really amazing point to make. Why don't I just check my box and sit back and wait for the Lord to come?
I wouldn't describe it as one's a better Christian. I'd say one has more experience. Maybe one has a better understanding of the characteristics and skills and requirements involved, but one's not better than the other.
Yeah, and clearly, I'm not even saying that the author intends that.
No.
I think he's pure in his motives, and I'm not trying to imply anything, but that's why we're talking about it, because I think it's an important thing to do. Yes, ma'am.
Then look at the parable of the talents.
Yeah.
So, the talents, 10, 5, and 1. The one said, I'm already a Christian.
Yeah.
I've got a talent here, but, I know my master might be, I don't know. So, they did nothing. They did not get rewarded for that. It's not that we won't be rewarded for being a Christian. We will be. But there is an expectation
expectation for growth. That's part of being a Christian, is an expectation for growth, right?
that's
And
the
I think
reason.
maybe that parable of talents is maybe the best to demonstrate that better than anything. Yeah, so, and we all believe that you can lose your salvation and no growth. You know, I think it's more, that's a big conversation, but there's, you know, no growth coming through your life, you could say is an indication that that faith was never where it needed to be to begin with. Lee, were you gonna say?
Y'all kind of touched on it, Tad. The idea is being a better Christian, not me being a better Christian than Luke, or Luke being a better Christian than me, but me being a better Christian than I was yesterday.
Yeah, right.
That growth is expected. That's one thing that the Apostle Paul was kind of scolding the Corinthians for in 1 Corinthians chapter 3.
Yeah.
You know, he said, I'm still having to talk to you like you're a bunch of babies.
Yeah.
You know, because they had not grown spiritually.
Right.
We're talking about building ourselves and becoming better Christians ourselves. And that's got to be our focus. You know, we've got to make ourselves better first. We've got to get that superfour out of our own head.
Yeah.
You know, if we can go over here and start helping other people.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point. There's lots of practical reasons for us becoming better, because there's lots of other things we can do. I thought of 2 Peter chapter 1, you know, it talks about verse 3, that he's given us everything pertaining to life and godliness. We have all that we need. By these he's granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, in order that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature. And this is a great building passage. To your faith, add moral excellence. To your moral excellence, knowledge, self-control. And there really is a progression in your life as you start with your faith and you go on to moral excellence and you go on to more knowledge. And that's really a very progressive passage in that way, right? So verse 10, therefore, brother, be all the more diligent to make certain about his calling and choosing you, for as long as you practice these things, you will never stumble. So that's another thing, is that, you know, if we don't grow, then the chance of us stumbling back into the world is higher, you know. We cannot encourage others the way that we need to. So there's lots of practical reasons for wanting to become better, to grow, because if we are stagnant, then that means bad things. Bad things are going to come if we're not bolstering our faith, if we're not working on those things, we're going to fall back into the world. And another little, just quick thought that I had, this is the right answer.
Oh, good.
Just another thought that I had was, you know, because I really kind of wrestled with this thought a little bit. It's like, okay, I've checked that box, and I think that I frequently fall into that conundrum of feeling like, okay, what do I need to do, because I've done these things, I've kind of cleaned up my life a little bit. What's the point of continuing in this growth? You know, I'm saved, right? I can sit back and wait for the Lord to return. And I think as part of that is that all of this goes back to our hearts, right? If our hearts, if I have turned to God, if I believe in God, and I have been saved, then if my heart is in the right place, what am I going to want to do? And that is to be more conformed to the image of his Son at all times, you know? And to me, that kind of answers that question a little bit, is that it's not a have to. Why do I have to get better? Why do I have to do this? It's, what can I know more about God? How can I know more about him? How can I be more like him? How can I be more pleasing to him? Because my relationship to him is what it needs to be. My heart is in the right place. And if my heart's in the right place, we don't have to ask those questions of, okay, what do I need to do next? It's, man, how can I be more like this? It's not an obligation feeling. It's more of that desire to grow, to be more like him. It's just going to be a organic, natural thing, because that's what I desire. And so as we see things in our lives that we can clean up, that desire to want to do that, while also resting in the security and understanding that I have been saved, that my salvation is secure with him. Yes, sir.
See, I think Jake brought this out, whenever you're looking for good things, look in Proverbs, right?
Yeah.
I think that was you that said that, and that was really good, right? Because Proverbs is full of such great information and useful things. And I think that, I think we all know if you're not growing, you're dying, right? If you're not getting better, you're dying. And so, but I think also, in the world we live in today, we are taught there is a winner, there is a loser, there's first, second, third, fourth, fifth place, and in today's world, everybody gets a trophy, right? So anyway, but we think that way, right? So we look around, and how do we judge if we're being a good Christian or not? How do we judge if we're growing or not?
we compare, right?
That's right.
We compare against, well, I'm doing more than he is, so I must be doing, right? So I would take you to Proverbs in chapter 16, verse 18, pride goes before destruction, and a high spirit before a fall. Better to be a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud.
Yeah,
right? And so we got to remember that there isn't going to be a first place.
Right.
There isn't going to be a last place. Every day you wake up, ego is such a huge thing, and it gets in the way a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
It's just every day you're trying to take a step forward, be better than you were yesterday, and it's not a comparative thing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the Beatitudes, start with poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit, because if we don't have that poverty of spirit, we're never going to have the attitude to be able to grow, to know that, okay, it's not anything that I've done. God has cleansed me. I'm righteous because of Him. And now this growth, again, going back to that heart idea, this growth is going to come because I want it. I want to be more like that. I want to be thankful for the salvation that has been given to me, for the cleansing that is given to me. And now I'm going to grow because of that. Anyway, we spent more time on that than I wanted to, but I think I just want to, I wanted to keep talking about that and make sure that we have the proper motivation for studying these specific things. All right, so let's go into building trust. And like we said, when I first picked up the book, I'll admit a little bit of cynicism about, okay, building faith, building trust. Come on, that's like, those two are kind of the same thing. But I think there are certainly a lot of those things that we can piece apart. And as we talked about faith, I think it's kind of, how can we distinguish those things? And just like in 2 Peter chapter 1, faith is so foundational to all the things that come after that, right? It's perfect that he started with faith, and that's why Peter starts with faith, is because if you don't have that faith to begin with, then you're not going to go any further than that, right? And I mentioned this passage last week. I love this passage, Hebrews 11:27, where it talks about Moses. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible, right? That's always been one of my favorite passages when talking about faith, is that Moses lived his life in disregard of Pharaoh, in disregard of all you think about the wealth that he could have had growing up in Pharaoh's house. I mean, he could have had it all, and he despised all that, and talked about that he forsook the passing pleasures of sin. He despised all that because he lived as if he could see him who was invisible. He could see God. God was a very real thing for him, and I guess after you talk to him in a burning bush, that's going to happen. Maybe you could argue for that, and also him, seeing the glory of God. Those are very impressionable things on Moses, clearly, but that was later in his life, But he saw God as a very real person, had a very real relationship with him, that drove his faith. So we think about faith as that. All those actions that are mentioned there in Hebrews 11, it talks about by faith Abraham, by faith David, by faith, all of these things. It says by faith they did these things. And then the actions that they took, that's the trust, right? All those actions that they took. Think about Abraham. I always think it's amazing. One of the things that he's praised for, by faith, Abraham left the country of his homeland, right, to go to a faraway nation that he didn't know anything about. That's trust. That's really a lot of trust to leave everything that you knew, that you grew up with. And God says, okay, I want you to go. It's like us saying, I want you to go to Africa, right? Like, oh, okay, God, that's a long way away. I don't know anybody over there. The conditions over there are not great. Abraham didn't know what he was really getting into, but that was a lot of trust. But it was the outpouring of that strong faith that he had, right? And so I think that we have to make that connection, that trust is certainly where that comes from. So simple question, maybe, but sometimes those are the hardest ones once you think about them a little bit. What is biblical trust? What is biblical trust? How would you define that? We're going to look at some examples of that. And then I'll just go ahead and say this up front. On Wednesday, I want us to save a lot of our specific applications for trust in our lives, how we apply that, what that looks like in our lives, because it looks very different than it did for ancient Israel, right? But I want you to be thinking about that, maybe through the beginning of this week. Think about ways that, in what things in my life am I placing my trust in God? So I just want to kind of throw that out there at the very beginning, because I want that to be something you really put a lot of consideration into. As I go through my life, how many times, first of all, am I thinking about God? Is my faith such that I see this invisible God in front of me all the time, right? That's kind of the take-home point of the last lesson. And then in my life, what am I trusting Him with? If you're like me, and I've kind of thought about that a little bit, those are fewer and further between than I would like to admit, you know. There's not a lot of times where I'm just saying, okay, God, I'm going to pray about this, and I'm going to leave it in your hands. Maybe some big things, you know, I tend to think about that with big things, but not a lot of specific things. Anyway, I'm saying that now so that you can think about it before Wednesday. We're going to talk about that on Wednesday. So, going back to this idea of biblical trust, how would you define that? What do you think about? Is there anything specific? And it could be just a simple, you know, on the surface, it is a very simple answer, right? What's trust? Well, trust, you know. I always hated those words I always thought it would be the hardest thing in the world to be a person who writes a dictionary. Like, some words are just like, that's a word, right? You know, that's how you define it.
I would say that biblical trust is that faith we talked about last week, you put it in action.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, we talked about Abraham having a working faith. You know, not just a belief, the demons believe.
Yeah.
But they don't have that trust, if you will, or that action to do what God says to do. Of course, like you say, the example He gave Abraham, I don't think God has given us something like that. I mean, at least we don't know.
Yeah.
As directly, but I always look at it that it's the working part of faith.
Okay, yeah, the working, so that's a great, and I think it's a very biblical definition. It would be something different than what somebody out in the world would give you of what trust is. You know, it's the working of your faith. I mean, I think that's a great way to start that.
I think a great example of what Brian's talking about, of a lack of faith with no trust. You know, in John chapter 12 and verse 40, he's talking about the rulers of the people.
Mm-hmm.
He said, nevertheless, even of the rulers, many believed on Him. Well, there's faith. We're thinking that they're off to a pretty good start there. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess Him lest they should be put out of the synagogue.
Yeah.
They didn't trust Him.
Right, yeah, yeah.
They believed, but they didn't trust that if they went ahead and followed and obeyed, that things would work out like they should.
Yeah. They didn't trust that the consequences of their actions were going to be worth those decisions. Yeah, right. Okay.
Similar to what Brian said, I'll compare it with faith a little bit, right? Faith is substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. So things we hope for, things we haven't seen. I trust because I have seen. And it has been proven over and over and over and over and over again that what you're saying is law, right, or is truth, or is going to take place, because it always has. And so I think about that in, you know, a couple of different contexts. One is, have I seen this exact thing before? Or have I seen so many things that have come out the way you've said it would, or shown me that I could trust you, that I can take anything else to the bank?
Yeah. That's great. I think that's another great, something I hadn't thought about, but was just that history of, you know, that's how you learn to trust people, right? That's what we tell our kids all the time. Well, I don't trust you because there's no history there.
So that's exactly what I was thinking about too, is there's people I trust immensely, and they've never given me a reason not to, and they've shown me multiple times that I can.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's true of God, you know. What of His promises has He not been faithful to, and all those things. I think it makes me think of 2 Peter 3, where it talks about their mockers that will come after their mocking, following after their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of His coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation, right? So you say that the Lord is returning. Where is that? You know, like, everything just keeps going the way it's always been going, and certainly that's a very modern day application. We hear people say that a lot today. Is that, there's God. I mean, I haven't seen any miracles, right? But we have that background in reading through the Bible. We understand that God has a long track record of being faithful in all of those things. It doesn't going to look like what a lot of people thought it would look like or what they wanted it to look like. But we build on that track record, really, right?
I will say the one thing that has grown my trust in God more than anything is welcoming trials into my life, like allowing things to just kind of work themselves out. And even if it's something that you have to surrender to every single day and go around the same mountain with God over and over and over again, but like it reminds me of James 1, testing your faith.
Yeah.
And I know we're talking about trust right now, but it sharpens your character when you go through different trials, whether it's sickness or relationship struggles or work struggles or whatever it is, because God always tells us, be still, I will fight for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to take care of them. And just not knowing not to repay evil for evil, but knowing that God is going to come through for you.
Yeah. All right, you're getting into Wednesday. This is the application part.
Okay,
I know
sorry,
you've always got a great application
But no, but
comments.
like that's one thing just for me over the past couple of years is just like all this, it's like little tiny fires popping up everywhere that you, it's like playing whack-a-mole.
Right.
You know, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to try to change my thought process of, okay, maybe this is happening for a reason to help grow me and to get me to that next level.
Certainly.
And just so, welcoming it instead of, poor pitiful me or whatever it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge you to be as specific as you can on Wednesdays about all this stuff. Those are great categories that you've talked about, and that's what I want everybody to think about is on Wednesday. Think about those things and how can we specifically let that start happening in our lives where it's not testing God, but it's doing what He's promised us, and that is giving things over to Him and trusting Him. All right. So if our faith is not strong, we will never trust the way that we should, right? So going back to that foundation of faith, that's got to be where it is. Think about the song, Be With Me, Lord. I love that line. Trust comes from a constant sense of His abiding presence. And Stephanie made this comment last week about our relationship with God. And I think a strong faith also leads to a strong relationship with God. We're seeing God all the time. If we see Him more, we're going to talk to Him more. We're going to be have that, I like that phrase, constant sense of His abiding presence, That feels kind of nebulous a little bit, maybe a little mystic, but I think that there's a real thing in that do we feel God's presence? Do we talk to Him? Do we have that relationship with Him? And that's what's going to lead to, again, a more outpouring of trust in the different things we go through.
Luke, I think we have to, on that same point, conscience. The way I'm thinking, how do we do that? And I think the way we do it is we continually remind ourselves that God is there, because we really can't see Him.
Yeah.
We just see the evidence.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot. And that's the days where sometimes I find myself, I'm not thinking about Him there, but then I look at the beautiful sky like, oh.
Yeah, right.
So we need, I mean, that's that constant sense, but it takes a conscious thought on that too.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic, I guess we should have talked about that last week in building our faith is just having constant reminders of things that direct us back to Him, and taking advantage of those. So I don't do that often enough. There's the old phrase, stop and smell the roses. That's a very practical phrase, but biblically, that's a very important concept of connecting us back to God and all the things that we see. What is it in Romans 1? The things which have been made, His divine nature, I'm butchering that. There's like a couple phrases of that are coming to me now, but not all of them together. Romans 1, so the creation of the world, its invisible attributes, His eternal power, divine nature, being clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. So he's saying that the whole world can look at the things that have been made and say, oh yeah, there's a God out there that did this, right? Think about this. Our trust is gauged on what we expect God to do. I have that as a question. I'm trying to think. I thought there's an inadvertent question mark. Sorry. Kind of like, I'm Ron Burgundy? Our trust is gauged on what we expect God to do. Okay, here's where I was going with that. Mark 5, and Brian, you mentioned this earlier, that the demons believe, right? There's the story in Mark 5 where Jesus goes to Capernaum, and there's the man that's throwing himself around. They can't even find him with chains, and Jesus comes and says, come out of him, and casts him into the swine. But the demon there says, what do I have to do with you? Do not torment me. What do I have to do with you? I think he calls him the Son of God. I didn't write all that down. But the demon knows who Jesus is, right? And he has a certain expectation of what Jesus is going to do, right? I know who you are. He may not have known his purpose. I don't know about that. Because, we talk about the angels. They long to look into what God was planning to do in 1 Peter. So I don't know what the demons knew about him, but he knew that he was the Son of God. He knew he had the power to do whatever he wanted to do. And he says, do not torment me, right? He's pleading for mercy from Jesus, right? Which is kind of a weird thing. So in a sense, maybe this is getting too philosophical, but in a sense, trust is what we expect to happen. The demon had a certain amount of trust that when Jesus found him, he was just going to torment him, right? And that because he's like, that's what I deserve. I mean, he knew what the consequences of his actions were. There was a certain amount of expectation of that's what was going to happen. And I think about the people that saw God. There's certain theophanies that are mentioned throughout the Bible. Isaiah, you remember whenever he sees God, he says, woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and I have seen the King, the Lord of hosts, right? Isaiah's like, I'm a dead man because I don't deserve to be here. I'm not worthy enough to be here. And so his expectation was that he was just going to be destroyed because he was seeing this great, powerful king that could just destroy him. Ezekiel has a very similar thing where he falls down like a dead man. The Spirit's got to pick him up and put him on his feet so he can even talk to him. Even John in Revelation, who lived with Jesus, saw the transfigured Jesus. When he sees Jesus with the flaming sword coming out of his mouth, he falls down like a dead man, right? So what's the expectation in all of those situations is that I'm not worthy enough to be in this, right? And so there's a certain amount of that. What did John trust God to do with that? I think there was very much this concern that what was going to happen was I'm going to be destroyed, right? And so I think that we can kind of gauge our trust based on what we expect, what we think God expects us to do, I guess is kind of a way of saying that. And that goes back to our faith, because the more we see God, right, the more we understand God, that we are in His presence, then we have this understanding of like, okay, if I believe, if I saw you right there beside me all the time, sure, maybe I would give up more of my possessions. Maybe I would take more stances. Maybe I would be the one willing to say, yes, I believe in God, and I get thrown to the lions, right? That only comes whenever your faith is strong enough, and then my expectation is that God is going to deliver me from this, right? So that, again, that's just another way of connecting faith and trust so much. So what do we expect God to do? Do we expect God to take care of us? Are there things in our lives that we're giving over to Him, like we've talked about? Or is our expectation is that if I don't take care of this, then it's not going to go well for me? Anyway, I don't know if that was kind of a far out there example a little bit, but I was trying to get to that idea again of connecting faith and trust a little bit more. All right, let's move on. Trust in the Bible. Let's talk about some Old Testament examples. Psalm 20, verse 7 says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. I don't know if that's ever been a temptation for you to trust in chariots and horses. So that's kind of why we have to talk about the difference between biblical trust and what was happening in the Bible versus what's happening in our lives. But what does trust look like in the Old Testament? What are some things you can think about? You know, why is that verse in there that some trust in chariots and horses and we trust in the name of our Lord? Why is that in there?
In so many Old Testament stories, men and women of God were asked to do very strange things. And they may have believed God and had faith in Him, but they didn't show their trust in Him until they actually were willing to go through with these rather strange things, like marching around the city of Jericho or whatever example you want to pull. They had faith in God, they've seen him work before, but until they were willing to march around the city or whatever it is, that's when they showed that they had trusted him as well.
Yep. Anybody else? Yeah, that's a great example is Jericho as well.
Abraham was told to pack up everything and go to someplace I'm gonna show you. You don't even know where you're going or what's there.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of faith, but it also took trust.
Yeah.
God would get him there safely.
God was going to do that. Yeah, I mean, think about just staying with Abraham for a while. Think about all the instances in his life. And I would say that there were some with Abraham. There were some times where he did trust him very much, and then some where he did not. Which is kind of interesting. With a great man of faith, his trust kind of wavered, and his faith wavered at times. What are some of those instances that you can think of? Cecily?
I think when he told Sarah to lie, that she wasn't his wife.
Right, yes.
Traveling.
You don't believe God can protect you, even though Sarah's a beautiful woman and you're going to, did it twice, right? Yeah, and Isaac does the same thing later. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. That is very interesting because it's like, come on, Abraham. I mean, you've trusted him and you would say greater things, but you're not going to trust him in this.
The book's called Building Trust, but sometimes in that case, it's rebuilding trust.
Yeah, rebuilding trust. Yeah,
because he broke it down.
Yeah,
he did not trust God at that point. That's a great point. But he rebuilt it.
Yeah, and that's an acknowledgement that we all have to make.
Right.
Our faith is not going to be where it always needs to be, and our trust is not always going to be where it needs to be.
I think that's part of our growth even, man.
Yeah.
At times we're going to get weak and be back, take a step back.
Yeah.
And 2 steps forward, 1 back.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else have any other examples?
One of my favorite is when the 12 spies were sent to Canaan to seek out the land and kind of see what it's going to look like. Basically, God was sending them to a hard place and kind of a scary place, and looks totally different from what they're used to seeing. But only 2 of them stayed faithful, and the rest of them scurried because they got scared. But Jacob and Caleb, they came back because they trusted God. Or Joshua, but they came back because they trusted God. And that's probably one of my absolute favorites is whatever he's asking you to do with your life, he has a reason for it. And it might be hard, it might be scary, but, he kind of take care of you.
Yeah, and I mean,
giants in the way.
There's giants in the way, but you got to conquer those giants.
I love the report. It's like, oh man, this land is great. They brought these grapes back that are huge. Everything is awesome. It's like, okay, let's go. Like, no. There's lots of fortified cities. We're like grasshoppers on their side. We're never going to be able to do this. Sorry. It's a great pipe dream.
When they saw everything that happened in Egypt, you're like, but why? You know we can do it. Why?
Okay, so I think we have to put ourselves in their shoes. And one of my favorite examples of that is whenever they're wandering, they cross the Red Sea, and you're like, okay, you crossed the Red Sea. Before they come to Mara in Exodus 15, Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea. They went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Right? So I don't care what you've been through in your life. I don't care what God just recently did for you. You and your 600,000 other men and lots of kids. I mean, you think about your kids. You got to start walking, out in the middle of nowhere, and it's been 3 days, right? I'm going to grumble about that, hey, Moses, what's going on here, man? I've got my whole family. It's been 3 days, and if you look at the pictures of that, there's green, lots of different places, but where they were, there's nothing green, It's all sand and rocks, And so I totally get that. I was like, I always, have a lot of empathy for the Israelites. It's I definitely would have been groaning. I would have been freaking out on day 1 at the end of day 1 that we don't have any water with us, right?
Just think about God's perspective, right? I just had you walk across the sea on dry land and bury the entire army in there. And you don't give me 3 days? Seriously?
But here's the deal. From a medical standpoint, 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. That's kind of a general rule, you're not going to live much longer than 3 days. In 3 days, you better start drinking your urine, that's what's going to happen. So, to me, that's a lot for them to trust in God to do, That's a lot. But God is testing them in that, and they kind of get, chastised for that a little bit. But I'm like, man, I don't have that trust,
Yeah, but so I'm going to piggyback off what he just said. When you were thinking about, I actually told Cecily, when you're talking about what acts of faith in the Bible, right? To me, Moses, Red Sea, Israelites, he goes, stretches out his hand, parts the Red Sea. It says it was like a wall, right? Dried the land. Let them walk across. So don't get me wrong, there's an army at your backside and you don't want to, but I'd rather fight the army than to deal with that. And then
you mean go through the?
The step
like,
through the Red Sea.
Oh, because of the walls. It's like, okay, I'm gonna step out the middle
of you.
You're right. I didn't think about that. Like, it takes a lot of faith just to step into the wall.
No, yeah, that's crazy. But then they go without food for 3 days and they're already whining. I'm like, or without water. Without water. And I'm going, did you not just see what happened?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, a little bit.
Well,
it's one thing for me to do it.
Like, he does big things for us in our life, and then we're whining about something, you know? And so, like,
You can whine
I just won't say anything else.
So the Israelites
I'll
always
put another class.
because of how many times they just and we're the same way.
Oh,
right? We
exactly.
really are.
It was much less challenging circumstances. That's the thing. Yeah.
But we don't know exactly
with much more proof.
murmured here, but we know in other cases that the sin wasn't getting thirsty. That wasn't the problem.
Right.
Wanting water was not the problem. The way they approached it was the problem.
Yeah.
And in other cases, they came in accusing God of bringing them out here to die.
Right.
Okay, that was the problem.
That's true.
Nothing at all wrong with Moses, with them going to Moses and say, look, hey, my kids need something to drink. What are we going to do for water?
Yeah.
To go and ask that legitimate question, but that accusatory tone that God brought us here to die, God's not going to take care of it.
Yeah.
That's what's the problem.
I just think that I would have been right there with him. You know, like I think who's in charge here, right? You know, because this is not very good planning, right? David and Goliath. I think probably the one that I like the most is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. You know, it's like what they say to him, like our God can deliver us from this, even if He doesn't, we're not bound down to your idol. You know, like that was trust. You know, you're facing certain death. And they're not even saying that God's going to deliver them. They're saying, I like that phrase, is that even if He doesn't, we're not doing this, right?
They had no clue He was going to save them. They knew He could.
Yeah.
But they went in anyway.
Well, I think that goes back to the track record. You know, if you think about the things that they've been through in their life, they haven't seen deliverance from God personally. They've heard the stories, right?
Yeah.
But they haven't seen that personally, and so that took a lot of trust for them to take that action. New Testament, he brings out in the lesson Peter walking on the water. And I think that's the perfect example of just, hey, you've seen something great like Peter. You saw Jesus walking on the water. You started to walk on the water, and then all of a sudden you're sinking. Like, what happened, man? But that just shows just how hard that is, you know. It says he looked at the waves, you know, and when, there's Joel Osteen sermon there, when you take your eyes off God, you're going to start sinking. But, that's really true, you know. That's right. But I mean, I think that's a great example of how difficult trust is, how great it can be. Peter certainly was willing to take that step, and he had the faith that Jesus could do that, but also that faded away really quickly. The centurion in Luke chapter 7, I really love that passage, and Jesus says, I've seen no greater faith in Israel than what that centurion did. He said, he made the implication. He said, I am a man under authority, and I have people under authority to me. I've seen all the things that you can do. I know that you can heal my servant without going there. You've got the authority to heal. You can do it from wherever you want to. He made that step. That was, to me, to be not an Israelite, nobody that believed, that didn't know God, but he was willing to take that step, that leap of trust, to me was really, really amazing. So, all right, we'll start with broad categories on Wednesday, kind of broad categories. So think about broadly how we can trust God, and then I want you to get really specific. Also, think about that this week. How can we trust God in our lives?
Go ahead. You got somebody to get. You've got
Sorry, I talked to
I'm a very organized person.
Morning.
Here's the thing, like, I know that we do the same thing, but yet, we have to have faith in things unseen.
Right.
They need to have faith in things seen.
Right.
I mean, they're a part of it.
Their first one, and they didn't use any because of the blood around their door,
I'm like,
and they're complaining about no water.
I actually would have been fine looking at this house, because I'm like, and Jesus, I'm good. What are you doing? First in the way. All in. Today you're going, yeah, read about it.